The old man sat on the porch of Silver Creek Ranch, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. It was July 1918, and the New Mexico sun hung low over the Magdalena Mountains, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rust. His grandson Clayton, just 18 and fresh-faced with the certainty of youth, sat beside him on the wooden steps. "Grandpa," the boy said, his voice carrying that peculiar tremor of someone about to step into the unknown, "were you scared when you went to war?" Jackson Brennan, 75 years old and carrying the weight of a lifetime in his bones, let out a slow breath. The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. "Scared," he repeated, his voice gravelly from decades of wind and dust. "Son, I was terrified. But there's something I feared more than Confederate bullets or cavalry charges." He paused, his pale blue eyes focusing on something far beyond the present moment. 163 nights. That's how long I listened to my baby daughter cry without being able to do a damn thing about it. Clayton shifted, confused. "Grace." "But she's fine now. She's got 3 kids of her own." "She is now," Jackson said. "But back then in the spring of 1878, I thought I was going to lose her, lose all of them." He took a sip of the cold coffee, grimaced, and set it down. Night 164, someone appeared on the horizon. A woman on an Appaloosa horse, riding like she'd been born in the saddle. She stopped at my gate, looked me dead in the eye, and said 5 words that changed everything. What did she say? The old man's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Now I am here." He leaned back against the porch post, and his eyes grew distant, traveling back 40 years to a time when his hair was still dark and his back didn't ache with every change in weather. "Let me tell you about that spring, boy. Let me tell you about the 163 nights." The year was 1878. March, to be precise, when the wind still carried the bite of winter, and the cottonwoods along the creek hadn't yet decided to trust the warmth. Jackson Brennan was 35 years old, and if you'd asked him then, he would have told you he was a man carved out of failures. The ranch house stood solid enough, 2 stories of ponderosa pine logs his father had cut and hauled 20 years prior. 160 acres of land that started at the creek bed and climbed up into the foothills. 68 head of cattle bearing his brand, 9 horses in the corral, and a barn that leaked only when the wind blew from the northeast. On paper, it looked like a life. But Jackson knew the truth. He sat at his desk in the small office off the main room, a single kerosene lamp throwing shadows across the ledger book. His hands, calloused and scarred from 15 years of ranch work, held a pencil that felt foreign as a scalpel. The numbers didn't lie, and they didn't care about his pride. Total debt, $1,847. Money in the bank, $127. Deadline 6 months. September 15th, 1878. He'd written it all down with the careful precision of a man who'd learned arithmetic in a Union Army field hospital, counting casualties instead of cattle. The math was simple and brutal. Even if he sold every head at top price, $18 per animal, he'd have $1,224, still $623 short. And that wasn't the worst of it. Jackson closed the ledger and opened the small journal he kept in the desk drawer. A habit from the war, recording details because his memory had proven unreliable. The nightmares saw to that. He flipped to the current page and read his own handwriting, night 163. Grace cried from 9:47 p.m. until 4:15 a.m. 6 hours, 28 minutes. I walked the floor, sang every song I know twice. Ruth tried to help but fell asleep at midnight. Samuel slept through it, thank God. My sleep this night, 2 hours, 11 minutes. He turned back through the pages. 163 entries, each one documenting his daughter's inconsolable crying. 2 years old, and something was wrong that neither he nor the town doctor could fix. Dr. Patterson had examined her twice, charged him $8 each time, and offered nothing but a shrug. "Some babies are colicky, Brennan, She'll grow out of it. But 6 months of nightly torture wasn't colic. Jackson knew it in his bones, the same way he'd known which soldiers in his cavalry unit would make it through the next battle and which wouldn't. Something was hurting his little girl, and he was powerless to help her. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled him from his dark reverie. Ruth appeared in the doorway, 12 years old and carrying herself with the rigid responsibility of someone forced to grow up too fast. Her mother's green eyes looked out from a face still soft with childhood, but her expression belonged to someone much older. "Pop," she said, her voice flat. "I found this in your desk last week. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the ranch accounts like you asked." She held out a piece of paper yellowed at the edges and creased from being folded. Jackson's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what it was. The advertisement he'd written 2 months ago in a moment of desperation. The one he'd never intended to actually send. The one that Ruth definitely wasn't supposed to see. She read it aloud, her voice carrying an edge of betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. "Widower rancher seeks capable woman. Must know healing ranch work. Heritage unimportant. $15 per month, plus room and board." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crack the floorboards. "You want to replace Ma?" Ruth said. Not a question. An accusation. Jackson stood up his chair, scraping against the wood floor. "No, Ruth, that's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. "You're advertising for a new wife like you're buying a horse. Ma's been gone 2 years and 4 months, and you're already looking for someone else." "Your mother," Jackson said, fighting to keep his voice steady, "can never be replaced. Not by anyone. But Ruth, this family is dying. You see it. Grace cries every night. Samuel barely remembers what it's like to have a full meal. I can't run this ranch care for 3 children and keep us from losing everything all at once. I'm failing. So you'll bring in a stranger? I'll bring in help, a partner. Someone who knows medicine, who can figure out what's wrong with Grace. Someone who can teach you things I can't. Someone who can help us survive." Ruth's eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. "And what about love? What about Ma?" Jackson moved around the desk and put his hands on his daughter's shoulders. "I loved your mother from the day I met her until the day she died. I love her still. That doesn't mean I'm not drowning here, Ruth. That doesn't mean I don't need help." She pulled away from him, clutching the advertisement. "Did you even send this?" "No. I wrote it and couldn't bring myself to mail it." "Good," she said, and turned to leave. "Ruth." She stopped but didn't turn around. 47 people, Jackson said quietly. "That's how many I've asked for help in the past 6 months. 47 people in Socorro who've either turned me down or quit after a few days because Grace's crying drove them away. I kept a list. It's in that same drawer." She looked back at him, then something shifting in her expression. "So yes," he continued, "I wrote that advertisement, and no, I haven't sent it. But I'm running out of options, and I'm running out of time. In 6 months, Vincent Kruger at the bank is going to take this ranch because I can't pay what I owe. Then where will we go?" Ruth's jaw tightened. She said nothing, but she also didn't throw the paper away. She folded it carefully and set it on his desk, then walked upstairs without another word. Jackson sank back into his chair and buried his face in his hands. The weight of it all pressed down on him like a physical thing. The debt, the sick child, the ranch falling apart, the ghost of his wife watching him make decisions she would have been better equipped to handle. Margaret. God, he missed her. Missed her practical wisdom, her steady hands, her ability to see solutions where he saw only problems. She died giving him grace, and some days he wondered if that was punishment for something he'd done in the war. All those men he'd killed wearing Confederate gray, all those faces that visited him in his sleep. The sound of a horse approaching pulled him from the spiral of guilt and memory. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out into the late afternoon light. A rider was coming up the long drive from the main road. Even from a distance, Jackson could tell this wasn't someone from town. The posture was wrong, too straight and alert. The horse was an Appaloosa spotted coat gleaming in the sun, and it moved with the kind of sure-footedness that spoke of mountain breeding. As the rider drew closer, Jackson's breath caught in his chest. It was a woman, but not like any he'd seen in Socorro. She wore buckskin pants and a shirt made of deer hide decorated with beadwork that caught the light. Her hair fell long and black past her shoulders, held back from her face by a strip of red cloth. Her skin was the color of copper pennies left in the sun, and even from 50 yards away, Jackson could see the set of her jaw spoke of determination earned through hardship. She was Apache, or at least partly Apache. In New Mexico Territory in 1878, that made her dangerous to know and more dangerous to employ. Jackson walked out onto the porch as she reined in her horse at the gate. They looked at each other across 20 feet of dusty yard, and he found himself unable to look away from her eyes. They were dark as coffee and held an intensity that made him think of thunderstorms gathering over the mountains. "Mr. Brennan," she said. Her voice was clear, educated, carrying only the slightest accent. "That's me," he said, trying to keep his surprise from showing. "Can I help you?" She reached into a leather saddlebag and pulled out a piece of paper. Even before she unfolded it, Jackson knew what it was, his advertisement, the one he'd never sent. "You seek capable woman for ranch work and healing," she said, not quite a question. "I am capable." Jackson came down the porch steps slowly, his mind racing. "Ma'am, I never sent that advertisement. How did you get it? You gave it to postal clerk 6 weeks ago. You changed mind, but he had already posted it to Santa Fe newspaper. I saw it there." She held it out to him. "I wrote response letter 3 weeks ago. You did not reply, so I came." He took the paper from her hand, and their fingers brushed for just a moment. Her hands were scarred, he noticed. Working hands. "I didn't reply because I never got a letter," he said. "The post in Socorro, they probably saw your name and threw it away. They're not exactly welcoming to your people." Something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, just acknowledgement of a truth she already knew. "My name is Sarah Whitecloud," she said. "My mother was Apache. My father was French trapper from Colorado, both dead 7 years now. I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded once, accepting the condolence. "I read and write English. I know mathematics. I know medicine, healing plants, how to set bone, deliver baby, treat fever and infection. I know ranch work, cattle, horses, chickens, garden. I am 28 years old. I am strong. I do not quit." Jackson found himself believing every word. There was no boasting in her voice, just a simple statement of fact delivered by someone who had nothing left to prove. "Miss Whitecloud," he began, but she cut him off. "I know what you think. Apache woman is trouble. Townspeople will not like it. They will make problems for you. This is true. But your advertisement said, 'Heritage unimportant.' Did you mean it, or were those just words?" Before Jackson could answer, a sound split the air that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat, the high-pitched wailing of a child in distress. Grace's cry carried through the open windows of the house, desperate and inconsolable. Sarah's head turned sharply toward the sound. "How long?" she asked. How long does baby cry like this?" Jackson's throat tightened. "Every night for 6 months, 163 nights. The doctor can't figure out what's wrong. Nothing helps." Sarah dismounted in one fluid motion and handed him her horse's reins. "I will see baby now. Now, Miss Whitecloud, I haven't agreed to hire you. I haven't even decided if this is a good idea." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or understanding. "Baby is in pain. I hear it in cry. You decide about hiring later. Right now, I see baby." And before Jackson could protest further, she walked past him toward the house with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she'd made up her mind and nothing short of gunfire would stop her. He tied her horse to the porch rail and followed her inside, his heart hammering with a mixture of apprehension and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Ruth stood at the bottom of the stairs, Grace in her arms. The 2-year-old's face was red and streaked with tears, her little body rigid with distress. Samuel, 9 years old and looking exhausted, stood nearby with the helpless expression of someone who'd run out of ideas. Sarah stopped in the doorway, and for a long moment she simply looked at Grace. Then she did something that made no sense at all. She began to hum. Low and rhythmic, a melody Jackson didn't recognize, but that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and unchanging. Grace's crying didn't stop, but it changed. The pitch lowered the desperation, easing into something more like confusion. The baby turned her head toward the sound, her tear-filled eyes, trying to focus on the stranger in the doorway. Sarah took 3 steps forward, still humming, and held out her hands. Ruth looked at her father, uncertain. Jackson found himself nodding, though he couldn't have explained why. The moment Grace settled into Sarah's arms, the crying stopped, not gradually, not with the hiccuping aftermath of a long cry. It simply stopped as if someone had closed a door between the pain and the child. The silence that followed felt louder than any sound. Sarah adjusted Grace in her arms, supporting the baby's head with practiced ease. She tilted Grace's head slightly to one side, looked at her left ear, then repeated the process with the right. Her fingers moved gently but with certainty, pressing around the baby's jaw behind her ears, along her neck. "Infection," Sarah said finally. "In ear, right side, maybe both, but right is worse. Pus trapped inside, pressure building. Every time she lies down, pain gets worse. That is why she cries at night." Jackson felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Ear infection." Dr. Patterson examined her twice. He said nothing was wrong. Sarah's expression hardened. "Your doctor is fool or does not care. Maybe both." She looked down at Grace, who had settled against her shoulder with the exhausted whimper. "This baby has suffered for months when she did not need to. I can fix this. 3 days, maybe 4, pain will be gone." "How?" Jackson heard himself ask. "What treatment?" "Plants, medicine from Earth, and knowledge passed from my grandmother to my mother to me." She looked at him directly. "You want me to help? Or you want me to explain first how I know what white doctor does not?" Samuel spoke up for the first time, his young voice carrying more authority than it should have. "Pa," she made Grace stop crying. "That's more than anyone else has done in half a year." Ruth said nothing, but Jackson saw the conflict in her eyes. She wanted her sister to be well, but accepting help from this stranger meant acknowledging their father might have been right to write that advertisement. "You can really cure her?" Jackson asked. "I can try," Sarah said. "If infection is very bad, if it has spread to bone, then no. She would need more than I can give. But I do not think it has gone that far, or baby would have fever. This is painful but not yet dangerous. I can help." The word yet hung in the air like a knife. "Then help her," Jackson said, the decision made before his conscious mind could catch up. "Whatever you need, whatever it costs, help my daughter." Sarah nodded once. "I need boiling water, clean cloths, good light. And I need you to trust me when I do things that seem strange." As if on cue, the sound of a horse and buggy approaching cut through the moment. Jackson walked to the window and felt his stomach clench. Vincent Kruger. The banker had impeccable timing, as always. Kruger was a man built from angles and arithmetic, tall, thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved with a straight edge and sharp pencil. He wore a black suit that cost more than most ranchers made in a month, and he carried himself with the particular arrogance of someone who held other people's futures in a leather folio. Jackson stepped out onto the porch as Kruger climbed down from his buggy. Behind him, through the open door, he could hear Sarah speaking quietly to Ruth, giving instructions. "Brennan," Kruger said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to talk about your debt situation. I know the terms, Vincent, 6 months, September 15th. That was before." Kruger pulled a sheet of paper from his folio. "I've had to revise the terms given your continued failure to make interim payments." Jackson's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I've paid every month I could. You know spring is lean time for ranchers." "And you know," Kruger said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining simple concepts to a slow child, that the bank has the right to adjust interest rates based on risk assessment. Given your circumstances, widower, struggling operation, questionable judgment. I've had to increase your rate from 8% to 12%. That adds $224 to your total debt. He held out the paper. New total $2,071, still due September 15th. The number hit Jackson like a physical blow. 2,071. Impossible. He'd have to sell every animal, every piece of equipment, and probably the clothes off his back to come close. Kruger's eyes moved past Jackson to the open door, and his expression shifted from professionally cold to something uglier. "Is that an Indian woman in your house?" Jackson didn't turn around. "That's a woman who's helping my daughter. Her heritage is none of your concern." "Oh, but it is my concern, Brennan. It's very much my concern." Kruger folded his papers with deliberate care. "You see, the bank considers character when evaluating loan risk. And a man who brings an Apache into his home around his children in 1878? That's a man with questionable judgment. That's a man who represents increased risk. Get off my property, Vincent." "I'm already leaving. But consider this, every decision you make reflects on your credit worthiness. Harboring that woman, that's a decision that will cost you." He climbed back into his buggy, then paused. 6 months, Brennan. Maybe less, given your choices. I'll be back." The buggy rolled away, dust rising in its wake. Jackson stood on the porch, his hands still clenched, his mind doing math that led nowhere good. $2,071. It might as well have been $2 million. He turned and went back inside. Sarah had taken Grace upstairs, and he could hear Ruth's voice asking questions, Sarah's calm responses. Samuel stood in the main room, looking at his father with eyes that seemed too old for 9 years. "Pa," the boy said quietly, "are we going to lose the ranch?" Jackson wanted to lie, wanted to reassure his son that everything would be fine, that adults had everything under control. But he'd learned in the war that lies, even kind ones, had a way of making things worse. "I don't know, son. I honestly don't know." Samuel nodded slowly, processing this. Then he said something that surprised Jackson. "That lady made Grace stop crying. Maybe she can help with other things, too." Before Jackson could respond, Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd removed her buckskin shirt and wore only a simple cotton undergarment, her arms bare and showing scars Jackson couldn't identify. She carried Grace, who was finally, blessedly sleeping. "Infection is in both ears," Sarah said, her voice low to not wake the baby. "Worse than I thought, but still treatable. I need to gather plants. There is a place by the creek, wet ground shade. Yes, about half a mile downstream. I go now before dark. I will return before nightfall and begin treatment." She started down the stairs, and Jackson saw Ruth following her curiosity, overcoming caution. "Miss Whitecloud," Jackson said, and she stopped. "What you said before about me deciding about hiring you later, I'm deciding now." She looked at him, waiting. "You stay. $15 a month, like the advertisement said, plus room and board. You help Grace, you help with the ranch, and we share the work equally. You're not a servant here. You're a partner. Is that clear?" Something shifted in Sarah's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes that suggested she'd heard words she hadn't expected to hear. "Clear," she said. Then after a pause, "Your daughter asked me earlier what I meant when I said 5 words to you." "What 5 words?" "The ones I will say now." Sarah looked at him steadily, and for the first time since Margaret died, Jackson felt like someone actually saw him. Not the struggling rancher, not the widower, not the veteran with nightmares, just him. "Now I am here," she said. "I do not run any more. I stay. We fight together, yes." And Jackson Brennan, 35 years old, and carrying the weight of 163 sleepless nights, felt something crack open in his chest. Not quite hope. Not yet. But maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. "Yes," he said, "we fight together." Outside, the sun dipped below the Magdalena Mountains, and night 164 began. But for the first time in 6 months, the house at Silver Creek Ranch was quiet. Grace slept in Sarah's arms, peaceful and pain-free. And somewhere in that silence, the future shifted slightly, opening a door that had been closed for far too long. Night 164 passed without a single cry from Grace's room, and Jackson Brennan woke at dawn feeling like a stranger in his own skin. For 6 months, his body had trained itself to jolt awake at the first sound of distress. Now, lying in his bed as pale light filtered through the curtains, he experienced something so unfamiliar it took him a moment to name it rest. He dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Sarah already in the kitchen. She'd transformed the space in the few hours since he'd last seen it. Herbs hung from twine strung across the ceiling beams, their leaves still glistening with morning dew. The air smelled of something sharp and medicinal, not unpleasant, but distinctly foreign. On the table sat several clay bowls containing liquids of varying colors, one golden yellow, another deep green, a third the color of rust. Sarah looked up from grinding something in a stone mortar. She'd braided her hair back from her face, and in the morning light, Jackson could see the fine lines around her eyes that spoke of a life lived outdoors in wind and weather. "Baby slept 7 hours," she said without preamble. "I gave her medicine 3 times in night. Golden seal mixed with warm mullein oil draws out infection, stops pain. This morning I will flush ears with gentle water, remove what comes out." Jackson poured himself coffee from the pot she'd made. It was stronger than he usually took it, bitter on his tongue, but clearing the fog from his mind. "You were up all night. Someone had to be. Medicine works best when given at right times." She set down the mortar and looked at him directly. "Tonight you will take a turn. I will teach you what to do. Partners share work, yes." The word partner still felt strange in his mouth, but he nodded. "Yes." "Good. Now your son Samuel is sick also." Jackson's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "What? Not same as baby. Different sickness. He has fever building. I saw it yesterday in how he moved, how his eyes looked. By tonight, maybe tomorrow morning, fever will be high. 103, maybe 104 degrees if we do nothing." "How can you possibly know that?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "I know because I have seen it 100 times. Because my grandmother taught me to see what others miss. Because your doctor looks at symptoms after they appear, but I see them before. Your son has infection in throat spreading to lungs. If we wait for Dr. Boy, we'll be very sick. If we act now, he will have fever for 1 day, maybe 2, then recover." Jackson set his cup down with more force than he intended. "If you're wrong, then I am wrong, and you find new person to help, but I am not wrong." She picked up one of the bowls, the golden yellow liquid. "This is willow bark tea, for fever. This," she gestured to the green bowl, "is yarrow and elderflower, for infection. And this," the rust-colored liquid, "is echinacea and golden seal, to strengthen body's fight. Every 3 hours he drinks. Tomorrow morning, fever breaks. Tomorrow night, he sleeps well. And if the doctor says different, your doctor did not know baby had ear infection for 6 months. What does that tell you about what he knows?" The logic was brutal and undeniable. Jackson looked at this woman who'd appeared on his doorstep less than 24 hours ago, who'd made his daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in half a year, who now claimed to see illness before it fully manifested. Everything about it should have felt wrong, should have set off every warning bell in his head. But Grace had slept. That was a fact more solid than any of his doubts. "All right," he said. "We do it your way, but I want to understand everything you're doing, every plant, every treatment. No mysteries." "No mysteries," Sarah agreed. "I will teach you everything. Start now. Willow bark contains salicin. In body becomes salicylic acid. White man doctors use this same thing, but they buy expensive pills from pharmacy. We get it from tree. Same medicine, no cost." She spent the next hour explaining her methods in detail that surprised Jackson with its scientific precision. She knew not just what plants to use, but why they worked, how they interacted with the body's systems. Her English was good technical when it needed to be, and he realized that somewhere in her past, someone had given her an education that went far beyond folk remedies. "Who taught you all this?" he asked finally. Sarah's hands paused in their work. "My grandmother was medicine woman for our band. She knew healing songs, sacred rituals, plant knowledge passed down many generations. When I was 8 years old, she began teaching me, said I had gift for seeing." She resumed grinding herbs. "When I was 14, my grandmother was killed. My parents too, my younger brother, 53 others from our band, by soldiers at Camp Grant in Arizona Territory, April 30th, 1871. The date landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Jackson had been in Kansas then, trying to put the war behind him, trying to build a life with Margaret. He'd heard about Camp Grant, read about it in newspapers, a massacre of peaceful Apaches by a mob of Tucson citizens and Papago warriors. Women and children killed while the men were away hunting. The government had called it regrettable, called it a mistake. I hid in root cellar. Sarah continued, her voice steady, but somehow emptied of emotion. I heard everything, screaming gunfire, children crying. I heard my brother call my name before he stopped calling. When it was quiet, I stayed hidden for 2 more days. Then I walked 15 miles to San Xavier del Bec Mission. The priests took me in." "I'm sorry," Jackson said, and the words felt pathetically inadequate. Sorry does not bring back dead. But the priests, they were kind. Father Miguel and Sister Catherine. They taught me to read English, to write, to do numbers. Sister Catherine had been nurse in Civil War. She taught me white medicine, to go with Apache medicine my grandmother gave me. When I was 21, they both died of cholera. I have been alone since then. 7 years of moving, working, being turned away from 47 places because of my blood. 47. The same number Jackson had written in his journal. The number of people who'd refused to help him. 48, he said quietly. I would have been 48 if you'd asked me 3 days ago, before Grace stopped crying. Sarah looked at him, then really looked at him, and something passed between them that had no name yet, but felt important. The moment broke when Ruth came downstairs carrying Grace. The baby looked better than Jackson had seen her in months, eyes bright, no longer crusted with tears, actually smiling. Behind Ruth came Samuel, and Jackson saw immediately what Sarah had seen the night before. His son moved too carefully, like every step required thought. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes slightly glazed. "Samuel," Jackson said, keeping his voice level. "Come here, son." The boy approached, and Jackson put his hand on his forehead. Warm. Not burning yet, but definitely warm. Sarah stood and brought the golden bowl. "You will drink this now. Then this, then this. Every 3 hours until tomorrow night. Taste is bad, but you will drink all of it." Yes, Samuel looked at the bowls with the wariness of a 9-year-old who'd been given medicine before. "What is it?" "Tree bark flowers roots. Things that fight sickness before it gets strong. You trust me." Samuel looked at his baby sister, peaceful and content in Ruth's arms. Then he looked at his father, who nodded. "Yes, ma'am," Samuel said, and drank the first bowl without complaint. He made a face that suggested the taste was indeed terrible, but he finished it. "Good boy," Sarah said. "Now you rest. Body needs to save strength for fighting." As Samuel headed back upstairs, Ruth spoke for the first time that morning. "You knew he was getting sick." "Yes." "How?" "Practice, attention, caring enough to look closely." Sarah began cleaning the bowls. "You want to learn? I will teach you. Then you can help your family when they need it." Ruth's expression shifted through several emotions, suspicion, curiosity, and finally something like cautious interest. "I want to learn." "Then watch. Ask questions. I will answer." Jackson left them in the kitchen and went outside to begin the day's work. Miguel Santos was already in the barn, a man of 48, who'd worked for Jackson's father and now worked for Jackson with a kind of loyalty that transcended employment. He was saddling horses when Jackson entered. "Boss," Miguel said, then paused. "There is Indian woman here. I saw her last night when I came for tools. Her name is Sarah Whitecloud. She's helping with Grace and the ranch work." Miguel's hands stilled on the saddle. "You know what town will say. I know what Vincent Kruger already said. I also know Grace slept through the night for the first time in 6 months, and Samuel's fever is being treated before it gets dangerous. I know 47 people refused to help me, and she didn't." Miguel nodded slowly. "Okay. If she works, I work with her. But town will make trouble, Jefe. Big trouble." "Let them try." They spent the morning moving cattle to fresh pasture, checking fence lines, and dealing with the 100 small crises that defined ranch life. Jackson's shoulder still ached where he'd injured it in the war, and by noon the pain had worked its way down his arm. He'd learned to live with it the same way he'd learned to live with the nightmares and the sudden sounds that made him reach for weapons that weren't there. When they returned to the house for the midday meal, Jackson found Sarah teaching Ruth how to make poultices. The two of them worked side by side, Sarah's hands guiding Ruth's, explaining the properties of each plant. Grace played on the floor with wooden blocks, making small, contented noises. Samuel sat at the table looking tired but not as flushed as he'd been that morning. They ate together, a strange new constellation of people bound by circumstance and necessity. Sarah didn't eat much, Jackson noticed, and what she did eat, she ate with deliberate slowness, as if food were something to be rationed rather than enjoyed. After the meal, Jackson asked Sarah to walk with him. They left Ruth with the children and headed down toward the creek, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. "I need to go into Socorro tomorrow," Jackson said. "We need supplies, and I need to talk to some of the other ranchers. There's something happening, something bigger than just my debt to Kruger." "I will go with you." "Sarah, the town won't exactly roll out a welcome mat for an Apache woman." "I know, but you said we are partners. Partners do not hide. Partners stand together." She stopped walking and looked at him. "You are afraid town will turn against you more if I am there. This is true. They will, but they already turn against you. Kruger already makes your debt worse. Hiding me will not change that. Standing together might." Jackson wanted to argue, wanted to find a way to protect her from what he knew was coming. But she was right. The moment he'd let her stay, the moment Grace had stopped crying, the course had been set. "All right," he said. "We go together." They continued walking until they reached the creek swollen with spring runoff from the mountains. Sarah knelt by the water's edge and began examining plants growing in the damp soil. Her hands moved with practiced certainty, selecting some, passing over others. "Can I ask you something?" Jackson said. "Yes." "Why did you come here? I mean specifically here to my ranch. You could have gone anywhere, looked for work anywhere. Why answer an advertisement from a widower rancher in the middle of nowhere?" Sarah didn't look up from her plant gathering. "Because advertisement said heritage unimportant. Most people say that they do not mean it. But sometimes, very rarely, someone means it. I thought maybe you were one who meant it." She glanced at him. "Was I wrong?" "No," Jackson said. "You weren't wrong. Good. Because I am tired of running, tired of moving every few months when people decide they do not want Apache woman near them. I want to stay somewhere, build something, have purpose beyond survival." She stood holding a handful of plants. "You need partner. I need home. Maybe we can give each other what we need." The simplicity of it struck Jackson hard. No romance, no dramatic declarations. Just two broken people trying to shore up each other's weaknesses and build something that could stand against the world. "That's a fair deal," he said. They walked back to the house in companionable silence. As they approached, Jackson saw a buggy tied up in front, and his stomach clenched. But it wasn't Kruger this time. It was Clara Mitchell from the general store in Socorro, a woman of 58 who'd been kind to Margaret and kinder still after her death. Clara stood on the porch talking with Ruth. When she saw Jackson and Sarah approaching, her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't leave. That was something. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jackson said, climbing the porch steps. "What brings you out here?" Clara looked at Sarah, then at Jackson, and something in her weathered face softened. "I heard talk in town, heard Vincent Kruger telling people you've made some questionable choices. Thought I'd come see for myself." She turned to Sarah. "You're the one who's helping with the children?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said. "My grandson had fever last winter. Doctor said nothing to do but wait. Boy almost died. You know, fever treatments. Many." Clara nodded slowly, making some kind of internal calculation. "My husband was killed 7 years back. Group of bandits attacking a homestead family. John rode out to help because that's the kind of man he was. Turned out the family being attacked was Apache. He died protecting them anyway." She looked at Sarah directly. "Not all of us judge by blood girl. Some of us judge by character and capability." Sarah's expression didn't change, but Jackson saw her shoulders lower slightly, releasing tension he hadn't known she was carrying. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Clara said. "I came to warn you. Vincent Kruger held a town council meeting this morning. He's pushing to raise Jackson's interest rate again, citing moral character concerns. He's got Judge Hargrove backing him up, and there's talk of making it difficult for anyone who trades with you." Jackson felt ice settle in his stomach. Can he do that? He can try. The bank's got a lot of influence, and people are scared. But there's a few of us who remember what it's like to need help and have doors slammed in our faces. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small parcel. "Coffee, sugar, and some other supplies. No charge. And if you need anything else, you come to my store. I don't care what Kruger says." Jackson took the parcel throat tight. "Clara, you don't have to do this." "No, I don't, but John would have, so I will." She climbed into her buggy, then paused. "One more thing. There's 17 other ranchers in this county facing the same pressure from Kruger. Might be worth talking to them. United front is harder to break than isolated targets." As Clara drove away, Jackson looked down at the parcel in his hands, then at Sarah standing beside him. One ally. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had that morning. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go to town. We face whatever comes. Together." "Together," Sarah agreed. That night, true to Sarah's prediction, Samuel's fever spiked to 104 degrees. Jackson sat up with him, while Sarah administered treatments every 2 hours. Ruth helped learning the rhythm of care, the precise measurements. By 3 in the morning, the fever broke. By dawn, Samuel was sleeping peacefully, skin cool to the touch. Grace woke only once, whimpered softly, and settled back to sleep when Sarah checked her ears and applied fresh medicine. 2 children healed. 1 ally gained. And tomorrow the real test would begin. Jackson stood on his porch as the sun rose over the Magdalena Mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. 47 days until his debt came due. $2,071 he didn't have. A town that was turning against him. And a partner who'd appeared out of nowhere with 5 words that might save them all or damn them completely. He looked back through the window at Sarah silhouetted against the lamplight, grinding medicine for the day ahead. Her hands moved with absolute certainty, as if doubt were a luxury she'd never been able to afford. Partners, Jackson thought. For better or worse, they were partners now, and whatever came next, they would face it standing side by side. The morning light grew stronger, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out to the new day. Jackson Brennan took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and prepared for war. Socorro on market day was a study in controlled chaos. Wagons crowded the main street, horses tied to every available post, and the smell of livestock mingled with dust and human sweat under the April sun. Jackson had been coming to this town for 15 years, first with his father, then with Margaret, and now alone, or rather not alone anymore. Sarah sat beside him on the wagon bench, her spine straight as a rifle barrel, her eyes taking in everything with the kind of attention that missed nothing. She'd changed her buckskin clothing for a simple cotton dress that Ruth had found in Margaret's trunk, dark blue with small white flowers. It fit reasonably well, though Sarah was taller and leaner than Margaret had been. Her hair was still braided, still held back with that strip of red cloth that marked her as clearly as any sign. "You are nervous," Sarah said. Not a question. Yes. Good. Man who is not nervous before a fight is fool or liar. She adjusted the basket in her lap, filled with eggs and butter they hoped to trade. But remember, they can hate us, but they cannot make us small unless we allow it. Jackson glanced at her. Who taught you that? Sister Catherine at Mission. She was from Ireland. People hated her for accent, for being Catholic, for being woman who would not marry. She taught me dignity is not given by others. It is kept or surrendered by self. They turned onto Main Street, and Jackson felt the change immediately. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. A woman with 2 children pulled them closer as if Sarah's mere presence posed a physical threat. Men looked at Jackson with expressions ranging from pity to disgust to something harder that might have been anger. Jackson guided the wagon to the hitching post outside Clara Mitchell's general store. Before he could set the brake, Vincent Kruger emerged from the bank across the street, flanked by 2 men. Jackson recognized Sheriff Tom Walsh and Judge William Hargrove. "Brennan," Kruger called out, his voice carrying across the street with the kind of projection that invited an audience. "A word, if you please." Jackson climbed down from the wagon and helped Sarah down. He felt her hand in his for just a moment, cool and steady, before she released it and stood beside him. Kruger approached with the sheriff and judge in tow. A crowd was already gathering, drawn by the promise of drama the way flies were drawn to carrion. "I thought we discussed your situation," Kruger said, his eyes flicking to Sarah with barely concealed contempt. "I thought I'd made myself clear about the bank's concerns regarding your character." "You made yourself clear," Jackson said, "and I made myself clear that my hiring decisions are my own business. That's where you're wrong." Judge Hargrove stepped forward, a man of 60 with silver hair and the kind of face that looked benevolent until you noticed the coldness in his eyes. "The territorial code gives us authority to intervene in situations that pose public health or safety risks. Harboring a hostile Indian falls under that authority. She's not hostile. She's a healer who's helping my children." "So you say," Sheriff Walsh interjected. He was younger than Hargrove, maybe 40, with the build of someone who'd spent years doing hard physical labor before politics had softened him. "But the good judge here has concerns. We all do. There's been Apache raids not 60 miles from here in the past year. How do we know she's not scouting for them, reporting our defenses?" Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice calm and clear. "If I wanted to scout for raids, Sheriff, I would not come to town in daylight, wearing white woman's dress and sitting on wagon in middle of Main Street. I would be in hills with field glass, watching from distance where you would never see me." The logic was so obvious that several people in the growing crowd laughed despite themselves. Sheriff Walsh's face reddened. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. "You think we're jokes to you." "No," Sarah said. "I think you are scared men looking for enemy you can see and control, because real enemies are invisible and make you feel powerless. I am convenient target, but I am not your enemy." Kruger's smile was thin as a knife blade. "Philosophical insights aside, Miss Whitecloud, the fact remains that Mr. Brennan here has defaulted on his moral obligations to this community. Judge Hargrove, perhaps you'd like to explain the legal ramifications." Hargrove pulled a document from his coat pocket with the kind of theatrical flourish that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. "I have here a warrant for the arrest of Sarah Whitecloud on charges of livestock theft and assault with a deadly weapon." The words hit Jackson like a physical blow. "What? That's insane. She's been at my ranch for 3 days." "The incident in question occurred 6 days ago," Hargrove continued smoothly. "A rancher named Thomas Garrett reported 15 head of cattle stolen from his property near Magdalena Pass. His men pursued the thieves and were attacked by individuals using bows and arrows. 2 men were injured. Witnesses describe an Apache woman matching Miss Whitecloud's description. Jackson's mind raced. 6 days ago, Sarah would have been traveling here from Santa Fe, responding to his advertisement. The timeline made sense for her journey, but proving she wasn't involved in a theft 2 days' ride away would be nearly impossible without witnesses. "This is a setup," Jackson said, his voice low and dangerous. "You know damn well she wasn't anywhere near Magdalena Pass 6 days ago." "Do I?" Kruger's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Then perhaps you can provide witnesses to her whereabouts, travel companions' documentation." Sarah's hand touched Jackson's arm, gentle pressure that said, "Wait, think." She addressed Hargrove directly. "You have warrant signed by you. You are judge who writes warrant and also judge who will hear case. Does this seem like justice to you? The territorial system allows for expedited proceedings in cases involving hostile Indians," Hargrove said. "It's perfectly legal." "Legal and just are not always same thing," Sarah replied. Sheriff Walsh moved forward, hand on the revolver at his hip. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me peacefully." Jackson stepped between them. "She's not going anywhere." "Then I'll arrest you both for obstruction." The crowd had grown to perhaps 30 people now, a mix of townspeople and ranchers. Jackson scanned their faces, looking for allies and finding mostly curiosity and fear. Then, through the press of bodies, he saw Clara Mitchell standing in the doorway of her store. She met his eyes and gave a slight nod. "Sheriff Walsh," Clara called out, her voice carrying authority earned through decades of being the person who extended credit when times were hard. "Before you arrest anyone, you might want to check your facts. I saw Sarah Whitecloud 5 days ago in Santa Fe. She was at the mission there talking with Father Miguel. I was visiting my sister. Hard to be stealing cattle near Magdalena when you're 135 miles away in Santa Fe." Walsh faltered. "You sure about that, Clara?" "I don't make statements I'm not sure about, Tom. You know that." Hargrove's expression tightened. "One witness doesn't invalidate the warrant. The matter will still need to be investigated." "Then investigate," Jackson said. "But she's staying at my ranch while you do. She's not spending one night in a cell for crimes she didn't commit." "That's not your decision to make, Brennan." "Actually," a new voice joined the conversation, "it might be." A man pushed through the crowd, and Jackson's stomach clenched when he recognized him. William Brennan. His older brother by 3 years, a man he hadn't spoken to in 6 months, following an argument about ranch boundaries and inheritance that had left both of them bitter. Will looked prosperous, too prosperous for a rancher who'd been struggling as much as Jackson last time they'd talked. He wore new boots, a new hat, and there was something in his expression that made Jackson's instincts scream warnings. "Will," Jackson said carefully, "what are you doing here? Same as everyone else, watching the show." Will looked at Sarah with undisguised interest, then at Jackson. "Didn't know you'd taken on help, Apache help at that. Brave choice, little brother. Or stupid, hard to tell which. If you've got something to say, say it." Will's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just saying times are changing. Some of us are adapting, making smart business decisions, taking opportunities when they present themselves." He turned to address the crowd. "For instance, I just sold my ranch, 180 acres for $3,200, cash, to Mr. Kruger's business associates." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of shock spreading through the crowd. Jackson felt his world tilt. "You sold Pa's land. Pa's been dead 15 years, Jackson. It's been my land for a long time. And now it's someone else's land, and I've got enough money to start fresh somewhere that isn't slowly dying." Will's expression hardened. "You should consider doing the same. Take whatever offer Kruger gives you and get out before you lose everything." "Who did you sell to?" Jackson asked, though he already knew the answer. "A syndicate out of Kansas City. Colonel Thomas Blackwell's outfit. They're buying up land all through Socorro County. Smart money says they'll own 40,000 acres here by year's end." Kruger stepped forward, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Colonel Blackwell is a visionary businessman. He sees the potential in this region for large-scale cattle operations. The future isn't small family ranches struggling to survive, it's consolidated holdings with proper capital and management. Translation, Sarah said quietly, but loud enough for many to hear. Rich men from far away will take land from people who live here, work here, die here. Then they will take profit back to Kansas City while you starve. She speaks truth, another voice called out. Jackson turned to see Miguel Santos, who must have ridden into town separately. I worked Brennan Ranch 20 years. Before that, I worked for his father. This land, it knows us. We know it. We make it good through sweat and blood. Rich man from Kansas City, he knows nothing except numbers in book. Numbers in books are what matter, Kruger snapped. Sentiment doesn't pay debts. Hard work doesn't guarantee success. The colonel is offering fair prices for land, and smart men are taking those offers. And stupid men are refusing and going bankrupt, Will added. Which are you, Jackson? Before Jackson could respond, a new figure pushed through the crowd. A man of 40, broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, with the look of someone who worked his own land rather than just owning it. Jackson recognized him, Robert Chen, who ran a ranch about 10 miles south. I'll tell you what kind of man Jackson Brennan is, Chen said, his voice rough with emotion. He's the kind who rode 15 miles in a snowstorm 3 years ago to help me dig out after my barn collapsed. Didn't ask for payment, didn't ask for anything, just helped because that's what neighbors do. He looked at Kruger. You want to know about character? There's your character. Another rancher, a woman named Sarah Johnson, no relation to the other, Sarah stepped forward. My husband died last year, left me with 300 acres and 2 boys to raise. Jackson spent 4 days helping us with spring branding. Wouldn't take a dime. One by one, voices emerged from the crowd. Not many, not a majority, but enough to shift the atmosphere from hostile to uncertain. Kruger's expression darkened. Touching stories. But gratitude doesn't pay mortgages. Jackson owes this bank $2,071 by September 15th. Unless he can produce that sum, his ranch will be foreclosed and sold. Probably to Colonel Blackwell, who's already expressed interest. So it's all connected, Jackson said, the pieces finally falling into place. You're working with Blackwell, buying up land for him. That's why you raised my interest rate. You want me to default so you can hand my ranch to your syndicate. I want you to honor your financial obligations, Kruger said smoothly. How that happens is up to you. Judge Hargrove cleared his throat. This is all very dramatic, but it doesn't change the fact that I have a warrant here that needs to be executed. Clara spoke up again. Then execute it properly, Your Honor. Give her a hearing with real evidence, not trumped-up charges based on someone's grudge. The law requires that she be held pending investigation. The law, Sarah said, should require that innocent people not be imprisoned without proof. But I understand. You are not judge interested in justice. You are judge interested in helping friends get rich. She looked directly at Hargrove. How much did Blackwell pay you, or Kruger, or are you partners in this stealing of land? Hargrove's face went purple. How dare you, Sheriff, arrest this woman immediately for slander in addition to the other charges? Walsh moved forward, but now a dozen people were between him and Sarah. Robert Chantu, Sarah Johnson, Miguel Clara, and several others formed a loose barrier, not threatening but present. Tom, Clara said to the sheriff, you really want to arrest people for protecting a woman who hasn't been proven guilty of anything. You really want this to be your legacy. Walsh looked uncomfortable, caught between authority and conscience. His hand left his revolver. Judge, maybe we should postpone this until we've got more evidence. If Clara says she saw Miss Whitecloud in Santa Fe, that's reasonable doubt. Your job is to enforce warrants, not question them, Hargrove snapped. My job is to keep the peace. Arresting someone in front of half the town when the evidence is questionable seems like a good way to start a riot. For a long moment the standoff held. Jackson could feel Sarah beside him, utterly still, her breathing controlled. He could see calculations running behind Kruger's eyes, weighing risks and benefits. Finally, Kruger stepped back. Very well, We'll postpone the arrest pending further investigation. But Miss White Cloud is not to leave Socorro County. And Jackson, your debt still comes due in 147 days, unless you'd like to discuss selling before foreclosure. I'm not selling. Then I'll see you in September, if you make it that long. Kruger turned and walked back toward the bank, Hargrove following with considerably less grace. Walsh tipped his hat to the crowd and left looking relieved to escape the situation. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with conversation. Will approached Jackson one more time, his expression unreadable. You're making a mistake, brother. Blackwell's going to get this land one way or another. Better to sell now while you've got leverage than lose it all for nothing. When did you become his messenger boy, Will? Something flickered in Will's eyes. Guilt, maybe, or shame. I became a realist. Something you should consider. He glanced at Sarah. And as for her, whatever you think you're doing playing savior to an Indian woman, it's going to cost you everything. The town won't forget this. And neither will I. He walked away before Jackson could respond. Sarah touched Jackson's arm. Your brother is afraid. Of what? Same thing everyone fears, being left behind, being poor, being powerless. Fear makes people do ugly things. She looked at the people who'd stood up for them, still lingering nearby. But fear also makes people find courage they did not know they had. Clara approached, wiping her hands on her apron. You two need supplies. You come to my store now while you've got people watching. Kruger can't do much when there are witnesses. They spent the next hour at Clara's store, and Jackson noticed something remarkable. People came. Not many, but a steady trickle. Robert Chen bought grain and mentioned he'd heard Jackson was looking to organize the ranchers. Sarah Johnson asked if Sarah the healer, not Sarah Johnson, could take a look at her youngest, who had a persistent cough. An older Mexican woman named Rosa brought her granddaughter, who had a rash that wouldn't heal. Sarah examined both children in the back room of the store, giving advice and small packets of herbs. She refused payment both times. You cannot afford to give medicine away, Jackson said as they loaded supplies into the wagon. I cannot afford not to. Those women will remember kindness. They will tell others. Allies are more valuable than money. As they prepared to leave, Miguel rode up alongside the wagon. Jefe, I talked to 6 ranchers while you were in store. 4 of them are being pressured by Kruger, same as you. They want to meet. Talk about maybe standing together. When? Saturday, at Chen Ranch. If you want to organize, now is time. Jackson looked at Sarah, who nodded. Tell them we'll be there. They rode out of Socorro as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. The wagon was heavier with supplies, but Jackson felt lighter despite everything. They had allies now, not many, but enough to make a difference. You did good back there, he said to Sarah. I did nothing except tell truth and not run. That's more than most people manage. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, Your brother sold land for $3,200. You owe $2,071. If you sold, you would have over $1,000 left to start fresh. I know. But you will not sell. No. Why, it would be logical, practical, safe. Jackson thought about his father building the ranch house, log by log. About Margaret's grave on the hill overlooking the creek. About Grace finally sleeping peacefully and Samuel's fever breaking and Ruth learning to see plants as medicine instead of just weeds. Because, he said finally, some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are bad. You understand that? It's why you came here instead of running again. Sarah nodded slowly. Yes, I understand. She looked out at the landscape rolling past, at the mountains, holding their snow like promises. So we fight. We find 147 days of ways to survive. We gather allies. We stand against men with money and power. And maybe we win, or maybe we lose, but we do not surrender. Partners, Jackson asked. Partners, Sarah confirmed. Behind them, Socorro grew smaller in the distance. Ahead, the ranch waited, and beyond that, 147 days until September 15th. 147 days to find $2,071 or lose everything. But as Jackson glanced at Sarah beside him, at her profile sharp against the sky, he felt something he hadn't felt in the 2 years since Margaret died. Not quite hope. Not yet. But maybe the memory of what it felt like to fight alongside someone who wouldn't run when the battle got hard. That would have to be enough. For now, it was more than enough. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of crystalline clarity that made the Magdalena Mountains look close enough to touch. Jackson stood on his porch at dawn watching the sky shift from indigo to pale gold and wondered how many more mornings he'd see this view from this exact spot. 143 days remained until September 15th. The number had become a countdown clock in his mind, ticking away with every sunrise. Inside, he could hear Sarah moving through the house with her usual efficiency. Grace's laughter echoed from upstairs, genuine and full-throated, in a way that still startled him after 6 months of hearing nothing but cries. Samuel was helping Miguel with the morning chores, his fever completely gone, as Sarah had predicted. Ruth was in the kitchen grinding herbs under Sarah's instruction, asking questions in that intense way she had when something captured her interest. 4 days since their confrontation in Socorro. 4 days of relative peace that felt like the held breath before a storm. Jackson went inside and found Sarah packing saddlebags for the ride to Robert Chen's ranch. She'd changed back into her buckskin clothing, more practical for riding than the cotton dress. Her movements were precise, economical. The motions of someone who'd learned early that wasted effort could mean the difference between survival and death. "You are worried," she said without looking up. "Cautious," Jackson corrected. "There's a difference. Is there—" Now she did look at him, and there was something in her expression that might have been amusement. "You have that look soldiers get before battle. I have seen it before. My father had it. Union cavalry came through our camp once when I was child. Your eyes look same way theirs did." Jackson poured coffee, needing something to do with his hands. "The war's been over 13 years. You'd think I'd be past that by now." War never ends for people who fought in it. It just becomes quieter. Lives and dreams and sudden sounds and moments when you see too much death in ordinary things. She tied off the saddlebag and straightened. "I do not dream of battles. I dream of silence after battles. Of walking through camp and seeing everyone I loved dead or dying. That silence is louder than any gunfire." The raw honesty of it struck Jackson silent. They'd worked side by side for 4 days, but this was the first time either of them had spoken so directly about the weight they carried. "Camp Grant," he said quietly. "Yes, I was 14. Old enough to understand death, but young enough to believe I could have stopped it if I had been braver, faster, smarter." She picked up the saddlebags. "Now I am 28 and know better. I could not have stopped it, but knowing does not make silence any quieter." "No," Jackson agreed. "It doesn't." They rode out an hour later, leaving Ruth in charge with Miguel, staying close to the house. The ride to Chen's ranch took 90 minutes at a steady pace, following creek beds and cattle trails through country that Jackson knew as well as his own face. Sarah rode beside him on the Appaloosa she'd arrived on, sitting her horse with a kind of natural grace that made riding look effortless. "Tell me about men we are meeting," Sarah said, as they crested a ridge that gave them a view of the valley below. "Robert Chen runs 300 acres southeast of my place. Good man, honest. His father came from China to work the railroads, saved enough to buy land. Robert inherited it and made it work despite people telling him a Chinese rancher would never succeed in New Mexico. So he knows what it is to be judged by blood instead of character. Yes. His wife Mary is from a Mexican family. They've got 2 boys, both teenagers. Robert's been fighting Kruger for 8 months ever since his loan came due, and the bank started adding fees and raising rates." "Who else?" "Sarah Johnson, widow, 300 acres north of town. Her husband died in a riding accident last year. She's got 2 sons, 12 and 14. Kruger's been pressuring her hardest because he thinks a woman can't hold a ranch." "Can she?" "She's holding it so far, but barely." Jackson guided his horse around a washout. "Then there's Marcus Webb. 400 acres west near the old Spanish land grant boundary. Former Confederate cavalry officer. We don't talk about the war, but he's solid. Knows cattle and horses better than most. If he fought for Confederacy and you fought for Union, how do you trust each other? Jackson considered the question. Because the war's over, and hating each other won't bring back the dead or change what happened. We're both trying to survive in the same hard country. That makes us more alike than different. Sarah nodded slowly as if filing away this information for future reference. They arrived at Chen's ranch to find 5 wagons and a dozen horses already there. More people than Jackson had expected. Robert Chen stood in the yard directing traffic, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw them approach. "Jackson, Miss White Cloud, glad you made it." He came forward to help Sarah dismount, a courtesy that clearly surprised her. "We've got coffee and food inside. Mary's been cooking since dawn." The house was packed. Jackson counted 17 people crammed into Chen's main room representing 12 different ranches. Sarah Johnson was there with her 2 sons. Marcus Webb, gray-haired and ramrod straight, despite his 60 years, stood by the fireplace. There were others Jackson knew by sight, if not by name, the Ortega brothers who ran a small spread near the mountains. A German couple named Friedrich, who'd homesteaded 5 years ago, 3 men from the Apache Creek area who Jackson had never formally met. And in the corner, looking uncomfortable and out of place, sat Jackson's brother, Will. Jackson's hand instinctively moved toward where his pistol would have been if he'd worn one. Sarah touched his elbow, a light pressure that said, "Steady, wait." Robert noticed the tension. "Will asked to come. Said he had information we needed to hear. I figured we should listen before judging." "He sold his ranch to the people we're fighting," Jackson said, not bothering to lower his voice. "I know, he told me. Said that's why we need to hear what he has to say." Robert gestured to the room. "Everyone, let's get started. We don't have all day, and there's a lot to discuss." People found seats or places to lean. Sarah stayed close to Jackson, her presence a steadying weight. He noticed how people looked at her with curiosity, but not the open hostility they'd faced in Socorro. Working people, Jackson thought. People who judged based on capability rather than prejudice because they couldn't afford the luxury of either. Robert stood in the center of the room. "Most of you know why we're here. Vincent Kruger and the bank have been systematically pressuring ranchers across Socorro County, raising interest rates, adding fees for closing on anyone who can't pay. In the past year, 7 ranches have been sold to Colonel Thomas Blackwell's Kansas City syndicate. Will Brennan's makes 8. Murmurs ran through the room. Sarah Johnson spoke up, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who'd been fighting alone too long. "It's not just the bank. Judge Hargrove's been issuing rulings that favor Blackwell's interests. Property disputes always seem to go his way. Water rights get reassigned. It's a coordinated effort." "That's because it is coordinated," Will said, standing up. Every eye in the room turned to him. "I know you all think I'm a traitor. Maybe I am. But I came here because you need to understand what you're up against." "Then tell us," Jackson said coldly. Will took a breath. "Colonel Blackwell isn't just some businessman looking to make money. He's backed by railroad interests, mining companies, and political connections that go all the way to Washington. His goal is to acquire 40,000 acres in Socorro County within 2 years. He's already got 8,000. Yours are next. We know that—" Marcus Webb said, his southern drawl still thick after all these years up north. "Question is what we do about it." "You can't fight him. That's what I came to tell you. Blackwell has unlimited capital lawyers, political influence, and 30 hired guns if it comes to violence. He will take this land one way or another. The smart play is to sell now while you can still negotiate terms." "And let him win?" Robert Chen's voice was quiet but intense. "Let him take land my father died building, land I'm raising my sons on, better than losing it for nothing when the bank forecloses." Will looked at Jackson. "You owe $2,071. You've got what, maybe $300 in the bank. Where are you going to find the rest? Even if you sell every head of cattle at peak price, you're still short. Jackson wanted to argue, but the math was brutal and undeniable. Sarah spoke for the first time. You say Blackwell will take land one way or another. What is other way besides bank foreclosure? Will hesitated, and in that hesitation, Jackson saw fear. What aren't you telling us, Will? Blackwell's men aren't just lawyers and bankers. The 30 guns I mentioned, they're not for show. There have been incidents. A barn fire at Henderson's place 2 weeks before he sold, cattle poisoning at Miller's ranch, an ambush on the road that put Morrison in bed for a month. Nothing that can be proved, but the pattern is clear. The room went silent. This was different from financial pressure. This was the threat of violence, of terror tactics designed to break resistance. So we have choice, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension. Sell and lose everything but lives. Or fight, and maybe lose lives too. Is that what you are saying? I'm saying you need to be realistic about your chances. And what did being realistic get you? Jackson asked. $3,200 and a guilty conscience. Will's face flushed. I've got a wife and 4 children. Martha's sick with consumption. The medicine costs $80 a month. I didn't have the luxury of being Noble Jackson. I did what I had to do to keep my family alive. The admission hung in the air. Jackson felt his anger deflate slightly. He'd known Martha was sick, but hadn't known how bad or how expensive the treatment was. Sarah stepped forward. Your wife, she has consumption. How long has she been sick? 8 months. What medicine does doctor give her? Laudanum for pain. Some kind of tonic that's supposed to help the lungs. Laudanum treats pain but does nothing for disease. Tonic is probably alcohol and herbs that do little. Sarah's expression was thoughtful. I know plants that help with consumption. Not cure, but slow disease, ease breathing, give strength. I will make medicine for your wife. No cost. Will stared at her, confusion and suspicion warring on his face. Why would you do that? Because she is sick and I can help. That is enough reason. She looked around the room. All of you have families. All of you are afraid. This is reasonable. Fear is not weakness. But surrender because of fear, that is weakness. We must decide, do we surrender or fight? Marcus Webb spoke up. Fighting means risking everything. Our families, our homes, possibly our lives. That's a big ask. Surrendering means losing everything for certain, Robert Chen countered. At least fighting gives us a chance. A small chance against overwhelming odds, one of the Ortega brothers said. Small chance is better than no chance, the German man Friedrich said in heavily accented English. In old country, we had no chance. Here we have land, we have rights, we have each other. That is something worth fighting for. Sarah Johnson stood up, her sons flanking her. I'm fighting, whatever it takes. I'm not giving up my husband's legacy to some railroad baron who's never set foot on this land. I'm in, Robert Chen said. And I, Marcus Webb added. One by one, people committed. The Ortega brothers, Friedrich and his wife, the 3 men from Apache Creek. By the time the declarations finished, 11 of the 12 ranches represented had agreed to stand together. 11 ranches, Robert said, doing the mental calculation. That's roughly 4,000 acres between us. If we can hold until spring, make it through the financial pressure and any other tactics Blackwell tries, we might be able to outlast him. We need more than just determination, Jackson said. We need a strategy. Blackwell has lawyers, judges, and guns. What do we have? Each other, Sarah said simply, and knowledge he does not have. You know this land. You know weather, water, cattle seasons. You know how to survive in hard country. He knows only money and force. Money runs out. Force can be countered, but knowledge of land, that is power, he cannot buy. Marcus Webb nodded slowly. She's right. We've got advantages if we're smart about using them. We share resources, share labor during peak times, watch each other's backs. We make it expensive and difficult for Blackwell to pick us off one by one. And we document everything, Sarah Johnson added. Every threat, every suspicious incident, every time Kruger or Hargrove does something questionable, we build a case. Maybe we can't win in Hargrove's court, but territorial courts in Santa Fe might be different. I can help with that, Sarah Whitecloud said. I read and write well. I can keep records, write letters to territorial governor, to newspapers in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, make what is happening here visible to people who can help. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, planning and organizing. They established a communication network, agreed on signals for emergencies, divided up responsibilities. By the time people began leaving, there was something in the room that hadn't been there when they'd arrived, a sense of purpose that transcended individual survival. Will approached Jackson as people were mounting up. I'm not joining you, I can't. Martha needs medicine, the kids need food and shelter, but I won't work against you either. And if Sarah can really help Martha, I'd be grateful. She can help, Jackson said. Sarah keeps her word. Unlike me, you mean. Will's expression was complicated, equal parts guilt and defiance. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm a coward. But I'm a coward whose wife might live a little longer because I made a hard choice. Can you understand that? Jackson thought about Grace crying for 163 nights. Thought about the desperation that had driven him to write an advertisement for a mail-order bride. Thought about Sarah appearing on his doorstep like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to articulate. Yeah, he said finally, I can understand that. Will nodded, started to leave, then turned back. Jackson, be careful. Blackwell's men, they're not playing around. If it comes to violence, they won't hesitate. Don't let pride get you killed. I'll try not to. The ride back to Silver Creek Ranch was quiet. Sarah seemed lost in thought, her eyes on the horizon where storm clouds were gathering over the mountains. Jackson watched her profile and wondered, not for the first time, how someone so young had accumulated so much wisdom about fighting and surviving. You are thinking loud thoughts, Sarah said without looking at him. Just wondering how you got to be so good at organizing resistance. Most 28-year-olds I know are still figuring out how to run a household. Most 28-year-olds did not watch their entire family murdered when they were 14, did not spend next 7 years moving from place to place, learning that survival requires community and that community requires courage. She finally looked at him. I am good at organizing resistance because I have resisted my whole life, against death, against hate, against people who think I should not exist. This fight with Blackwell, it is just another version of same fight. Different enemy, same struggle. And you're not tired of fighting. Exhausted. But tiredness is not reason to stop. You keep going until you cannot, then you rest, then you keep going again. That is all any of us can do. They rode in silence for a while, the storm clouds growing closer, the air taking on that electric quality that preceded rain. Jackson thought about 143 days, thought about $2,071 he didn't have, thought about barn fires and poisoned cattle and ambushes on dark roads. Sarah, he said finally, if this goes bad, if Blackwell's men come with violence, I want you to take the children and go, get them somewhere safe. She stopped her horse and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You think I will run when fighting starts? I think you've seen enough violence for one lifetime. I think protecting children is more important than protecting land. And I think, Sarah said slowly, that you do not understand me yet. I do not run anymore. I told you this on first day. I meant it. She urged her horse forward again. If violence comes, I fight. I protect children by fighting, not by running. Running just means violence follows and finds us somewhere else with no allies and no home to defend. Better to stand and fight here with you, with others who will stand also. Even if we lose, even then. Because some things matter more than winning or losing. Dignity matters. Courage matters. Standing beside people you trust matters. She glanced at him. You matter. These 143 days, whatever comes in them, we face together. That is what partners do. The first drops of rain began to fall as they approached the ranch. Ruth came out onto the porch waving. Behind her, Grace toddled on unsteady legs, laughing at the rain. Samuel emerged from the barn with Miguel, both of them grinning at the welcome moisture after weeks of dry weather. Jackson looked at his home, his children, the woman beside him who'd appeared out of nowhere with 5 words that had changed everything. 143 days to save it all or lose everything. 143 days to face whatever Colonel Thomas Blackwell could throw at them. The odds were terrible. The chances of success minimal. But sitting there in the rain, watching his daughter laugh and his partner smile at the simple joy of water falling from the sky, Jackson Brennan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt ready. Let the storm come. They would face it together. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm of work and watchfulness. The 11 Allied ranches operated like a single organism, coordinating cattle movements, sharing labor during branding season, and maintaining a network of signals that could summon help within hours. Jackson had never seen cooperation like it in all his years ranching. Desperation, Sarah observed one evening, made better neighbors than prosperity ever had. It was a Tuesday in early May when the first real blow fell. Jackson was repairing fence along his eastern boundary when he saw the smoke. Not the thin white column of a cooking fire or the gray wisps of someone burning brush. This was thick and black, billowing up from somewhere near Robert Chen's ranch like a funeral pyre. Miguel saw it the same moment. They exchanged one look and were running for their horses before either spoke a word. Sarah emerged from the house as they mounted. She took in the smoke, the urgency in their movements, and disappeared back inside. When she reappeared 30 seconds later, she was carrying her bow and a quiver of arrows already changed into her buckskin riding clothes. "You are not leaving me behind," she said, mounting her Appaloosa before Jackson could argue. They rode hard, covering the 10 miles to Chen's ranch in under 40 minutes. The smoke grew thicker as they approached, and Jackson's stomach clenched when he saw what was burning. Not the house, thank God. But the barn, Chen's entire hay storage for the coming winter, was engulfed in flames that reached 50 feet into the air. Robert Chen stood in his yard with his 2 sons and his wife Mary, watching helplessly as the structure collapsed in on itself with a sound like bones breaking. His face was streaked with soot and something that might have been tears, though Jackson couldn't be sure. What happened? Jackson dismounted, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it anyway. Riders, 6 of them, maybe 7, came just after dawn when the boys were out checking cattle and Mary was in the garden. Robert's voice was hollow, scraped clean of emotion by shock. They had torches already lit, rode straight to the barn, threw them inside, and rode off. Whole thing took maybe 2 minutes. Did you recognize any of them? Too far away, and they wore bandanas over their faces. But their horses were too good for ordinary drifters. These were professionals. Sarah walked around the burning barn, staying well back from the heat, but studying the ground with that intense focus she brought to everything. After a complete circuit, she returned. 7 horses, she confirmed, all shod recently, all moving fast. They came from northeast left, heading southwest toward Magdalena Pass. 1 horse has crack in left rear shoe, makes distinctive mark. If we follow now, we might catch them before they reach mountains. They've got an hour head start and fresh horses, Miguel said. By the time we gather enough men to make it safe, they'll be long gone. So we let them go. Robert's eldest son, James, was 16 and vibrating with anger. Just let them burn our barn and ride away. We document it. Jackson said, the plan forming even as he spoke. Sarah, you're good with drawing. Can you sketch those hoof prints, especially the one with the cracked shoe? Yes. And we write down everything, time, number of riders, direction, every detail. Then we send it to the territorial governor, to newspapers, to anyone who'll listen. We make a record. A record doesn't rebuild my barn, Robert said quietly. Doesn't replace 6 months of hay that just went up in smoke. No, but 11 ranches working together can get you through the winter. We share hay, share labor to cut more before first snow. You help us when our crisis comes, because it will." Jackson looked at the assembled group. This is what Blackwell wants. He wants us isolated, scared, turning on each other. We don't give him that. Mary Chen, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Jackson's right. We knew this was coming. We prepared for it. Now we follow through." She looked at her husband. "The barn can be rebuilt. Our family is safe. That's what matters." Over the next week, 4 more incidents occurred. Sarah Johnson's cattle were driven off in the night, scattering across 20 miles of rough country. It took 3 days and help from 5 other ranches to round them up again. Marcus Webb found 2 of his horses dead, poisoned by tainted grain someone had left in his pasture. The Ortega brothers' well was fouled with a dead animal, making their water undrinkable. And through it all, Vincent Kruger smiled his thin smile in Socorro, and Judge Hargrove issued rulings that somehow always favored Colonel Blackwell's interests. Jackson was in town on a supply run when he saw the notice posted outside the land office, a public auction scheduled for June 15th. 3 ranches being sold for unpaid debts, Henderson, Morrison, and Miller. All 3 had been pressured to sell in the past months and had refused. Now the bank was foreclosing. He brought the notice back to show Sarah, who read it with that expressionless mask she wore when processing information that made her angry. 3 ranches total of 900 acres. If Blackwell buys these at auction, he will control land between your ranch and Chen's ranch. He will cut off access to northern pastures, force you to drive cattle extra 30 miles to reach water. I know. Jackson slumped in his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 35 years plus a few extra. We're losing ground. Every week that passes, he picks off another piece. By September, there might not be enough of us left to matter. Sarah set down the notice and looked at him with those dark eyes that saw too much. You're thinking of giving up. I'm thinking realistically about our chances. No, you are letting fear make decisions. This is different from being realistic. She stood and began pacing, a habit she had when working through problems. Blackwell uses same tactics everywhere. Violence, legal pressure, economic pressure, all designed to make you feel helpless, make you believe resistance is futile. But he has weakness too. What weakness? He's got money, lawyers, guns, and political connections. What do we have that matches any of that? We have what he does not understand and cannot buy. We have knowledge of land, loyalty to each other, and willingness to adapt. She stopped pacing and faced him. You know what I think? I think we have been playing defense. We respond to his attacks. We document his crimes. We help each other recover. This is good, but it is not enough. We need to attack also. Attack how we can't fight 30 hired guns. Not with guns, no. But there are other weapons. Information is weapon. Exposure is weapon. Making his crimes so visible that even corrupt judge cannot ignore them, that is weapon also. Jackson leaned forward. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting we stop trying to prove crimes in court that is already bought. Instead, we make crimes so public, so undeniable, that territorial government in Santa Fe must investigate. We get newspapers involved. We get other ranchers in other counties involved. We make Blackwell's actions a scandal that reaches beyond Socorro County. How? Sarah pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. We send letters to every newspaper in New Mexico Territory. We detail every incident: barn fires, poisoned cattle, fouled wells, foreclosures, unquestionable debts. We include dates, locations, witnesses. We make it a story of rich outsider using terror to steal land from honest families. That could take weeks to organize. So we start now. I write well, I organize well. Give me 3 days, I will have letters ready to send. She looked at him intently. But this only works if we can prove connection between Blackwell and the violence. Right now we have suspicions but no proof. The hoof prints from Chen's barn, Miguel said from the doorway. Neither of them had heard him enter. The one with cracked shoe. If we could find that horse, prove it belongs to Blackwell's men, that would be connection. Sarah nodded slowly. Yes, but how do we find one horse among hundreds in Socorro County? "We don't find the horse," Jackson said, an idea forming. "We make the horse come to us." The plan was risky and required bait they couldn't afford to lose, but 3 days later, Jackson spread word through Socorro that he'd be moving his entire herd to summer pasture along Apache Creek. 50 head of cattle, his entire wealth on 4 legs driven through isolated country with minimal guards. It was the kind of opportunity Blackwell's men wouldn't be able to resist. They moved the herd out at dawn on a Saturday, Jackson and Miguel driving the cattle, while Sarah and Ruth stayed at the ranch with Grace and Samuel. But hidden in the rocks along the route were Robert Chen and his 2 sons, Marcus Webb, and 3 of his ranch hands and the Ortega brothers. 11 men, total, all armed, all waiting. The attack came at midday when the herd was strung out through a narrow canyon. 7 riders appeared on the ridge above exactly as Sarah had predicted. They had the high ground and superior numbers, or so they thought. "Now!" Jackson shouted, and the hidden ranchers opened fire. Not to kill. That was the agreement they'd made. Shoot to wound, to disable, to capture, not to murder. They needed these men alive and talking. The gunfight lasted maybe 90 seconds. The attackers, caught by surprise and suddenly outnumbered, tried to flee. 2 went down immediately, horses shot out from under them. A third took a bullet in the shoulder. The remaining 4 scattered, but Chen's sons were excellent trackers and young enough to chase on horseback through a country that favored locals over outsiders. When the dust settled, they had 3 prisoners, one with a shoulder wound that needed tending, one with a broken leg from his horse falling, and one who'd surrendered without a fight when he found himself surrounded. Jackson approached them, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. "You boys work for Colonel Blackwell." "Go to hell," the one with the shoulder wound spat. "That's not a denial." Jackson nodded to Miguel, who began examining the horses they'd captured. It took him less than 5 minutes to find what they were looking for. A crack in the left rear shoe of a bay gelding, exactly matching the prints Sarah had sketched from Chen's barn. "This horse was at my ranch 3 weeks ago when someone burned my barn." Robert Chen said, his voice deadly quiet. "You want to explain that?" The prisoner said nothing, but his eyes gave him away. Fear, recognition, calculation. Sarah had been right. You didn't need to prove everything in court. You just needed to prove enough to make the story undeniable. They took the prisoners to Socorro, not to Sheriff Walsh, who was in Kruger's pocket, but directly to Clara Mitchell's store, where a crowd could gather and witness. Within an hour, 30 people had assembled to hear the story. Jackson laid it out simply: the barn fire, the hoof prints, the matching shoe, the ambush. "These men work for Colonel Blackwell," he said. "They've been terrorizing ranchers across Socorro County on his orders, and we have proof." "That's a lie." Vincent Kruger pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger. "You have 3 drifters who happened to ride near Chen's ranch and a horse with a common hoof problem. That proves nothing." "Then let's ask them," Jackson said. He turned to the youngest prisoner, the one who'd surrendered without fighting. "What's your name, son?" The kid couldn't have been more than 19. He looked terrified. Danny Morrison." "You related to the Morrison who's losing his ranch at auction next month?" The kid's eyes widened. "That's my uncle, but they told me it was just cattle rustling, not—" "Shut up, Danny," the wounded one growled. "Who's they?" Jackson pressed. "A foreman named Sykes. Works for the syndicate out of the Blackwell Ranch near Magdalena. He hired us 6 weeks ago, said we'd be protecting property and moving cattle. He didn't say nothing about burning barns or poisoning wells or—" Danny stopped, realizing he'd said too much. "But you knew," Sarah Johnson said, stepping forward. "You knew what you were doing to my cattle, to Marcus's horses, to Robert's barn." "Ma'am, I needed the money. My family's losing everything, and Sykes was paying $40 a month, which is more than I ever—" "$40 to destroy other families?" Mary Chen's voice cut like a blade. $40 to burn food that would feed children through winter. Danny couldn't meet her eyes. Kruger tried to regain control. "This proves nothing about Colonel Blackwell. A foreman hiring drifters for ranch work doesn't implicate—" "It does when the foreman's on Blackwell's payroll and the targets are all ranchers Blackwell wants to acquire," Clara interrupted. Tom Walsh might ignore this, but I guarantee the territorial marshal won't. Neither will the newspapers. You wouldn't dare, Kruger said. Watch me. Clara looked at the crowd. I'm writing to the Santa Fe New Mexican tonight. Anyone here who's witnessed these incidents, come see me. We're making this official. The crowd murmured approval. Not everyone there, not even half, but enough to shift the balance. Enough to make Kruger realize he was losing control of the narrative. You're making a mistake, Kruger said, his voice low and dangerous. All of you. Colonel Blackwell has invested significant capital in this county. He has powerful friends. You think exposing hired hands changes anything. You think it stops what's coming. Maybe not, Jackson said. But it slows it down, makes it expensive, makes it public, and that's enough for now. Kruger left without another word, but his expression promised retaliation. That night back at the ranch, Sarah helped Jackson clean and oil the rifles they'd used in the ambush. Ruth and Samuel were asleep upstairs. Grace was in her bed, finally sleeping through nights without the ear infections that had plagued her. Miguel was in the bunkhouse, and the ranch was quiet except for the usual sounds of animals and wind. We won today, Sarah said softly. Small victory, but real. We did. But Kruger's right about one thing. This doesn't stop Blackwell. Just makes him angrier. Good. Angry men make mistakes. Patient men are dangerous, but angry men reveal themselves. She set down the rifle she'd been cleaning. Jackson, I need to tell you something. The seriousness in her tone made him look up. What is it? Your brother Will came to see me 3 days ago. He brought his wife Martha like I offered. I examined her, gave her medicine that will help slow the consumption. But while I worked, Will talked. He told me things about Blackwell's plans. Jackson's hands stilled on the gun oil rag. What things? Blackwell is planning major action for late June. Will does not know details, but he heard Sykes and other foremen discussing it. Something bigger than barn fires or scattered cattle. Will thinks Blackwell is planning to force multiple foreclosures simultaneously, maybe with violence to ensure compliance. Will wanted to warn you but could not be seen helping us publicly. So my brother's playing both sides. Your brother is trying to save his wife while also trying to save his conscience. I do not judge him harshly for this. He is doing what he can within his limits. Sarah looked at Jackson directly. But warning is real. We have maybe 6 weeks to prepare for something bad. We need to use that time well. Jackson thought about 106 days remaining until September 15th. Thought about $2,071 he still didn't have. Thought about barn fires and poisoned cattle and hired guns. Then we prepare, he said. We make alliances stronger, gather more evidence coordinate with territorial authorities, and if Blackwell brings violence, we make sure we're not caught unprepared. We also, Sarah said quietly, should discuss what happens if we lose. If ranch is foreclosed, if violence becomes too dangerous. We should have plan for children for survival. We're not losing. Planning for loss does not mean accepting it. It means being practical about possibilities. She put her hand over his, and the contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with fear or planning. I want to stay here, Jackson. I want to fight for this place, but I also want children safe. Ruth, Samuel, Grace. They matter more than land. I know. He turned his hand over so their palms met fingers intertwining. Sarah, these past weeks having you here, it's been... Grace cried out from upstairs. Not the agonized wailing of her infected ear days, but a simple nightmare cry. Both of them stood immediately, the moment broken, but not lost. Sarah headed for the stairs. I will check on her. You finish guns. Jackson watched her go. This woman who'd appeared on his doorstep with nothing but a horse and 5 words of introduction, who'd healed his children, organized resistance, fought beside him, and somehow become essential to his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. 106 days to save the ranch. But somewhere in the past 3 weeks, the stakes had changed. It wasn't just about land anymore. It was about building something with someone who understood that partnership meant standing together in fire and watching each other's backs in darkness. He finished cleaning the rifles, checked the locks on the doors and windows, and climbed the stairs to find Sarah sitting in Grace's room humming that low Apache melody while the child slept peacefully. "She's fine," Sarah whispered. "Just bad dream. I will stay until she settles completely." Jackson nodded and went to his own room, but sleep was a long time coming. Outside, the New Mexico night was full of sounds: cattle, lowing horses moving in the corral wind in the cottonwoods. Normal sounds of ranch life. But beneath them, if you listened carefully, you could hear the gathering storm. Blackwell's response would come. The violence would escalate. The final confrontation was approaching, like weather rolling down from the mountains, inevitable and potentially devastating. They had 106 days until the debt deadline, but Blackwell wasn't waiting for September. He was coming in 72 hours with 43 guns and complete knowledge of their defensive plans. Jackson stood on his porch that night watching storm clouds gather over the Magdalena Mountains. Sarah joined him, her presence a steadying weight. "In the war," Jackson said quietly, "the worst moments weren't the battles. They were the nights before knowing what was coming and being powerless to stop it." "You are not powerless. You have allies, you have warning, you have intelligence about enemy." Sarah looked at him. "And you have me. That counts for something. Yes, that counts for everything." In the distance, lightning flickered inside the clouds. The storm was coming in more ways than one, but for the first time in a long time, Jackson Brennan felt ready to face it, because he wasn't facing it alone. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late June, carried by a rider from Santa Fe who looked like he'd pushed his horse hard to get there. Jackson was in the barn when Miguel brought it to him, the territorial seal still intact on the wax. He opened it with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't, because Sarah was watching, and he'd learned that showing weakness in front of her felt worse than actual defeat. The letter was from Governor Lew Wallace himself. "Well," Sarah asked. Jackson read it twice to make sure he understood correctly. "He's ordering a full investigation into land acquisitions in Socorro County, sending a territorial marshal and 2 deputies. They'll be here in 10 days to interview witnesses and examine evidence." "That is good news, yes. It's something. Whether it's enough." He trailed off, looking at the calendar Ruth had marked on the wall. 79 days until September 15th. 79 days until the debt came due. The response from Blackwell came faster than the marshal ever could. 3 nights later, Jackson woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses screaming. He was moving before conscious thought caught up, grabbing the rifle he now kept beside his bed, running for the stairs. Sarah met him there, already dressed, her bow in hand. "Barn," she said, and they ran. The barn wasn't burning, not yet. But 6 riders circled it with torches, and as Jackson burst through the door, he saw the lead rider, a man he'd never seen before, broad-shouldered and cold-eyed, preparing to throw. "I wouldn't," Jackson said, rifle aimed at the man's chest. The rider smiled. "You going to shoot all 6 of us before we burn this place to the ground?" "No," Sarah said from behind Jackson, her bow drawn, and an arrow aimed at the rider's heart. "But I can put 3 arrows in 3 men before they react. Jackson gets 2 more with rifle. That leaves one of you to burn barn alone and explain to Blackwell why 5 of his men died for nothing." The math was brutal and undeniable. The riders exchanged glances, and Jackson saw the calculation happening behind their eyes. This wasn't worth dying for, not for $40 a month. "Sykes said you'd fold," the lead rider said. "Said you were just a broken-down veteran and his squaw." "Sykes was wrong," Jackson replied. "Now get off my land before this goes a direction none of us want." For a long moment the standoff held. Then a new voice cut through the darkness. "Enough." A 7th rider emerged from the shadows beyond the barn. This one was different, older, better dressed, sitting his horse with the kind of authority that came from commanding men in situations more serious than barn burnings. Even in the torchlight, Jackson could see the Confederate cavalry insignia still visible on his saddle. "You must be Sykes," Jackson said. "I am, And you must be the fool who thinks he can fight Colonel Blackwell." Sykes gestured to his men, and they lowered their torches. "I came to deliver a message personally. The colonel is done playing games. You have 1 week to accept his offer, $2,000 for your ranch paid in cash, no questions asked. After 1 week, the offer drops to $1,000. After 2 weeks, it drops to nothing, and you lose everything at foreclosure. Tell the colonel I'm not selling. Then you're a fool and a dead man, both probably." Sykes looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. "You're good with that, Bo. Probably could have hit 3 of my men like you said. But there's more where these came from, 30 more to be exact. You ready to fight 30 men to keep land that's going to be taken from you anyway?" "If necessary," Sarah said simply. Sykes shook his head. "Waste of talent, waste of life, but it's your funeral." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. Jackson and Sarah stood in the barn doorway long after the hoofbeats faded. Finally, Sarah lowered her bow. "They will come back," she said. "I know. With more men. With violence we cannot stop by ourselves." "I know that too. They will come back with more men," she said. Jackson took her hands. "The truth I'm fighting because you showed up and changed everything. Losing this ranch would hurt, but losing you would destroy me. What are we building?" "I don't know yet, but I don't want to lose it." He pulled her closer. "Somewhere in the past 3 months, you stopped being just my partner. You became—" She kissed him before he could finish the sentence. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce and certain, the kiss of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be talked out of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she said simply. "I think I have since the day you told me I was not your servant. But I did not want to say it while everything was crisis and fear. I wanted to say it when it was choice, not desperation. Is this the right time for choice, with Blackwell's men riding away and threats hanging over us? This is only time we have. Tomorrow is not promised. War taught you that, massacre taught me that. We say what is true now, or we risk never saying it at all." Jackson cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I love you too. I didn't think I could feel this way again after Margaret. Didn't think I deserved to, but you make me believe in second chances." They kissed again, slower this time, and the world narrowed to just the two of them and the barn and the New Mexico night, wrapping around them like a blanket. A cough from the darkness broke the moment. Miguel stepped into the light, looking embarrassed but determined. "Sorry, Jefe, but riders are moving toward Chen Ranch. I saw torches heading that direction." The peace shattered like glass. Jackson and Sarah were running for horses before Miguel finished speaking. They reached Chen's ranch to find it under attack. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Sarah's arrows found 3 targets before the attackers knew she was there. Miguel's rifle cracked steadily. Jackson worked his Winchester like the cavalry soldier he'd once been. The fight lasted 5 brutal minutes. When it ended, 4 wounded prisoners remained and 2 bodies lay in the dust. Mary Chen had taken a bullet through the shoulder. Sarah had her on the kitchen table within minutes. "Bullet went through clean," Sarah said, probing the wound. "You'll live, Mrs. Chen." One dying prisoner talked. His name was Travis. "Sykes ordered hits on 3 ranches tonight. Yours, Chen's, and Webb's. Said to make examples." "Webb's ranch," Miguel said. Jackson and Sarah rode hard, 12 miles through darkness. They arrived to find Webb's house burning. Marcus Webb stood in his yard rifle in hand, surrounded by 5 bodies. Blood ran down his left arm. "You're late, Brennan," Webb said. "But we handled it. Lost the house, kept our lives." Before Jackson could answer, the sound of multiple horses approaching made everyone reach for weapons. But the riders who emerged from the darkness were allies. Robert Chen led them despite his head wound, followed by Sarah Johnson and her sons, the Ortega brothers, Friedrich and his wife, and a dozen others. "We saw the fire from Chen's place," Robert said. "Figured you might need help." 8 riders appeared on the ridge. Sarah stopped Jackson from raising his rifle. "I know that lead rider," she said, voice breaking. The Apache warrior was perhaps 45, scarred and weathered. He raised his hand in greeting. "Naiche," Sarah whispered. "My uncle. I thought you were dead." He dismounted and embraced her. "Little owl, 7 years I searched. They told me you died at Camp Grant. I hid in the root cellar. Mother was calling for me, but I was too scared. You were a survivor, as she wanted. Her last words were, 'Let my daughter live.'" He studied her. "These are your people now." Sarah looked at Jackson and the ranchers. "Yes." "Then they are my people also. We are 8 warriors. We are tired of running. If you fight, we fight with you." The next morning, 23 ranchers and 8 Apache warriors met at Chen's ranch. Jackson laid it out. "Blackwell escalated to war. We stand together or scatter." "I stay," Robert Chen said. Others echoed him. 3 ranchers chose to leave. 20 stayed. Sarah stepped forward. "I will infiltrate Morrison Ranch. Blackwell needs servants. Apache woman will not raise suspicion." "Too dangerous," Jackson protested. "We are all in danger. Trust me to do this." After an hour of argument, he agreed. 2 days maximum. That afternoon, as Sarah prepared to leave, Jackson walked with her down to the creek where they'd had their first real conversation months ago. The water ran clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the mountains, and the cottonwoods provided shade from the brutal June sun. "When this is over," Jackson said, taking her hand, "when Blackwell's dealt with and the debt is settled one way or another, I want to do this right, court you properly, ask you to marry me in front of witnesses with a real ceremony." She smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "You are asking me now before it is over. This is better. Shows you believe there will be after." "Will you marry me?" "Yes, but first I complete mission. Then we marry. Then we build life together that is ours, not stolen, not threatened. Deal. Deal." They kissed under the cottonwoods, and Jackson tried to burn the moment into his memory, the taste of her lips, the warmth of the sun, the sound of water over stones. Something to hold on to in the next 48 hours of not knowing if she was alive or dead. Sarah left at dusk. Jackson watched until she disappeared. The next 48 hours were the longest of his life. On the morning of the second day, Will appeared at the ranch riding hard and looking like he hadn't slept. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and grabbed Jackson's arm. "They know," Will said, his voice ragged with fear. "Blackwell knows someone's spying. One of his men recognized Sarah from the fight at Chen's ranch. They're setting a trap." Jackson felt his blood turn to ice. "When? Tonight. They're planning to catch her leaving, make an example of her in front of everyone." Will's eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. "Jackson, I know I betrayed you. I know I chose money over family, but I can't let them kill her. Not after she helped Martha. Not after—" His voice broke. "Tell me what to do. I'll do anything." "Gather everyone," Jackson said. "We ride for Morrison Ranch in 1 hour. That's suicide. Blackwell's got 30 men. We've got Naiche's warriors and surprise." 25 armed men reached Morrison Ranch at sunset. They spread out in a wide arc. Naiche confirmed Sarah's location. "She knows about the trap. Then we move before she does. Can you create a distraction?" Naiche smiled coldly. "They will remember it." The attack came from 4 directions at once. Naiche's warriors set fire to the hay storage on the east side, drawing guards that direction. Robert Chen and his group hit the bunkhouses from the south with gunfire that was loud but deliberately aimed high, more noise than lethality. Marcus Webb's contingent blocked the main road north, cutting off escape routes. And Jackson, with Miguel and Will, went straight for the small building where Sarah was being held. They met resistance immediately. 3 guards who'd stayed at their posts despite the chaos. The gunfight was brief and brutal. Miguel dropped one with a single shot. Jackson's rifle barked twice, and a second guard fell. The third raised his hands in surrender, and Will disarmed him without hesitation. Jackson kicked open the door to find Sarah bound to a chair, a bruise darkening her left cheek, but her eyes blazing with defiant fury. Behind her stood Sykes, a pistol to her head. "One more step and she dies," Sykes said. Jackson froze. Through the window he could see the ranch erupting in chaos. Fires burning, men running, gunshots echoing. But in this small room, everything had narrowed to the gun against Sarah's head and the choice he had to make. "You don't want to do that," Jackson said, keeping his voice level. "Don't I? She's a spy. She's been stealing documents, listening to conversations. Colonel Blackwell wants her dead." "Where is Blackwell?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite her situation. "Hiding while others do his killing. That is what cowards do." "Shut up," Sykes snarled, pressing the gun harder against her temple. "The territorial marshal arrives tomorrow," Jackson said. "You kill her. You're not just a hired gun anymore. You're a murderer. That's a hanging offense." "I'm already a dead man if I let her go. At least this way Blackwell can't say I didn't complete the job." The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then Will did something that surprised everyone in the room. He dropped his rifle, raised his hands, and stepped forward. "Take me instead," Will said. "I'm the one who told them about the trap. I'm the one who betrayed Blackwell's confidence. She's just a cook who listened too much. I'm an actual traitor." "Will, no." Jackson started, but his brother cut him off. "I've made a lot of wrong choices, little brother. Let me make one right one." He looked at Sykes. "You want someone to make an example of, make it me. Tell Blackwell you caught the real spy. Let the woman go." Sykes was considering it. Jackson could see the calculation happening. Then the door behind them burst open, and Colonel Thomas Blackwell himself entered, flanked by 2 guards. Blackwell was not what Jackson had expected. He'd imagined someone older, harder scarred by a lifetime of taking what he wanted. Instead, Blackwell was perhaps 50, well-dressed, with the kind of face that belonged in a bank or a courtroom rather than a ranch under siege. "Enough of this," Blackwell said, his voice carrying the clipped authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Sykes, put the gun down. This has gotten out of hand." "Sir, she's a spy. She stole—" "I know what she did. I also know that in approximately 12 hours, Territorial Marshal Williams will arrive with federal authority to investigate every land transaction in this county. Killing anyone right now would be catastrophically stupid." Blackwell looked at Jackson with something that might have been respect. "You've been more trouble than I anticipated, Brennan. Most men fold when faced with financial pressure. You built an alliance instead." "What do you want, Blackwell?" "I want what I've always wanted. Consolidated land holdings that can be managed efficiently and profitably. But I'm a businessman, not a murderer. There are other counties, other opportunities." He gestured to Sykes. "Release her." Sykes hesitated, then lowered his gun. Will immediately moved to untie Sarah, his hands shaking slightly as he worked the knots. "This isn't over," Jackson said. "Actually, it is. I've already instructed my lawyers to withdraw all pending foreclosures in Socorro County. The marshal's investigation will find nothing actionable because, as of noon today, there's nothing to investigate. I'm consolidating operations in Lincoln County instead." Blackwell straightened his coat. "You won, Brennan. Congratulations. You kept your land and your alliance. All it cost you was 3 months of hell and property damage across the county. And the people you hurt, the barns burned, the cattle poisoned, will be compensated. My lawyers are drawing up settlement agreements as we speak. Everyone who suffered damages will receive fair market value plus 20%. Blackwell moved toward the door. "I don't make the same mistake twice. Socorro County is more trouble than it's worth, but there are plenty of other places where ranchers are less organized and less stubborn." He left his guards following. Through the window, Jackson could see Blackwell's men standing down the fires, being extinguished, the chaos resolving into an uneasy peace. Sarah stood rubbing her wrists where the ropes had cut into her skin. She looked at Will with an expression Jackson couldn't quite read. "You were willing to die for me. Why?" "Because you saved my wife. Because I owed a debt I could never repay. Because maybe, just maybe, doing one good thing could balance out all the bad I've done. Will looked at Jackson. I'm sorry for everything. For selling to Blackwell, for betraying you, for being a coward when you needed me to be brave. Jackson studied his brother, this man he'd known his entire life, but had stopped understanding somewhere along the way. You came back when it mattered. That counts for something. The ride back to Silver Creek Ranch was quiet. Sarah rode beside Jackson, close enough that their legs brushed occasionally. Behind them came the ranchers and Nietzsche's warriors, victorious but exhausted. As they crested the final ridge that gave them a view of the valley, Sarah spoke for the first time since they'd left Morrison Ranch. It is really over. The fighting is. The debt still comes due in 72 days, but we're alive and we're together. That's more than I expected 3 months ago. The debt will be resolved, Sarah said with certainty. Governor Wallace is not corrupt like Hargrove. He will investigate Kruger's rate increases, find them illegal, cancel debt to original amount. You will see. She was right. The territorial marshal arrived the next day and within a week had uncovered a pattern of illegal lending practices that implicated not just Kruger, but Judge Hargrove and half the town council. The debt was reduced to its original $847, and with the settlement, money from Blackwell's lawyers plus the sale of cattle at peak summer prices, Jackson paid it in full on July 28th, 48 days early. The wedding took place on a Saturday in August with the entire alliance of ranchers in attendance, plus half of Socorro and a delegation of Apache, including Nietzsche and his warriors. Reverend Abel performed the ceremony in the ranch yard with the Magdalena Mountains, providing a backdrop that no church could match. Ruth stood as Sarah's attendant, wearing a dress that had belonged to her mother, but looking toward a future that included both her lost parent and her new one. Samuel held Grace, who giggled throughout the ceremony and called Sarah Mama, loud enough for everyone to hear. Jackson had written his own vows, but when the moment came to speak them, he found he couldn't remember the carefully crafted words. Instead, he simply said what was true: I promise to see you, not as my helper, but as my equal, not as my employee, but as my equal, not as someone who fills a space, but as the person who completes me. Sarah's vows were simpler, but no less powerful. I came here expecting to be servant. You taught me I am partner. That changed everything. I promise to stand beside you in all that comes, to heal what can be healed, to fight what must be fought, and to love without conditions or limits. They kissed as husband and wife while the assembled crowd cheered, and Jackson felt a completeness he hadn't known was possible. Not a replacement for what he'd lost with Margaret, but something new and equally precious built on different foundations. The years that followed proved what partnership could accomplish. The ranch prospered, growing from 68 head of cattle to over 200 within 3 years. Sarah's school, started informally in the ranch house, eventually became a proper building that served children from 20 families, both white and Apache. Nietzsche's band settled permanently on land Jackson deeded to them, creating the first integrated community in Socorro County. Ruth grew into a teacher who worked alongside Sarah, bridging cultures through education. Samuel became a rancher with his father's steadiness and his stepmother's innovation. Grace, who never remembered the 163 nights of crying, grew up bilingual in English and Apache, comfortable in both worlds. In 1883, 5 years after Sarah's arrival, Jackson stood on his porch and watched his wife teaching a class of 15 children in the yard. She was 33 now, her hair still long and dark, but with the first hints of silver starting to show. Grace sat in the front row, 8 years old and endlessly curious. Ruth helped with the younger students. Samuel worked the northern pasture with Miguel. Everything had changed, and yet the land remained constant. The same mountains, the same creek, the same house his father had built from logs cut in those mountains. Jackson thought about the old man he'd been in 1918, sitting on this same porch telling his grandson Clayton about the 163 nights. That man had lived another 35 years beyond this moment, had seen children grow and grandchildren born, had watched the world change in ways he couldn't have imagined. But this moment right now, in 1883, this was when it all came together. This was when the struggling widower and the Apache healer built something that would outlast them both. Sarah looked up from her teaching and caught him watching. She smiled, and in that smile was everything they'd survived, and everything they'd built, and everything they would become. The fence still stood, the one Jackson and his father had built 20 years ago. It needed repair in places needed attention and care. But it stood because they'd chosen to maintain it, because they'd chosen to protect what was inside family dignity, love that crossed every border and survived every storm. He closed the journal and walked outside to find Sarah waiting on the porch. She'd put Grace to bed and finished her evening work, and now she stood looking at the stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear New Mexico night. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "About how different life is from what I imagined. When I rode here 5 years ago, I expected to be servant, maybe wife in name only, certainly not partner in truth, not mother to 3 children, not teacher to community." She leaned into him. "I expected so little, and you gave me everything. We gave each other everything." They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd learned that the best conversations were often the ones that needed no words. Behind them, the house they'd built together. Before them, the land they'd fought for. Around them, the life they'd created from nothing but determination, and 5 words that had changed the world. The old man paused. It was 1918. Again, July heat, settling over Silver Creek Ranch. Clayton sat quietly beside his grandfather. "So that's how Grandma Sarah came here," Clayton said. 5 words that changed everything. Jackson nodded, looking at mountains that hadn't changed in 40 years. "She's inside making supper right now, 70 years old and still teaching children twice a week." "Grandpa, you said you were scared going to war. How did you find courage?" "Same way I found it in 1878. I didn't fight alone. I had a partner." Jackson put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Whatever you face in Europe, remember, courage isn't absence of fear. It's fighting alongside people you trust for something worth protecting." Clayton nodded. Inside, they could hear Sarah humming that Apache melody. "The fence still stands," Jackson said, gesturing to the old posts. "Not because it's strong, but because we chose to protect what's inside. Family, dignity, love that crosses borders. That's what you and Grandma built. That's what we built together." Jackson stood. "Come on. Your grandmother gets fierce when we're late for supper." They walked inside, leaving the porch empty. The mountains stood eternal. The creek ran clear, and somewhere in that house a 70-year-old Apache woman who'd arrived with 5 words was setting the table for family. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything.